Welcome to our third video in this series on talking about cycling in response to the pandemic and going forward. I want to start this video with a quote from the UK, and you saw that little screenshot from there. "If ever there was a good time to get on a bike, it's now. You will be helping take pressure off public transport. You'll be looking after your health. You'll be looking after the health of others, and you'll be helping the environment. Let's all get pedaling and help on the road to recovery." That was Sir Dave Brailsford, a UK principal. And with the recent announcement in the UK of almost $3.5 billion of investment for cycling and walking there, it's an exciting time and inspiring time from around the world of things going on to aid in cycling and walking. So we're here to talk about that, and we've got some great guests. But before we do that, we're going to have some quick announcements. Luis, you want to share some of those announcements or say hello?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Luis. I'm the board chair of London Cycle Link. You just heard Daniel. He's our executive director. So just quick announcements before we start. Our petition is almost 1,000 people already signed. So if you didn't sign it yet, please join us to support more space for pedestrians and cyclists here in London, Ontario. Our second announcement, yes, so next week we're doing an online reading of our book, one of the books we published, the Yellow Bicycle book. And it's Linda Bussier from the London Public Library who is doing the online reading with us. So if you want to sign up for the event, here's the link. And you can also see it's available on the Share the Road website. It's a partnership we're having with them. Our third announcement is we are collecting, as we prepare for those series of conversations with a lot of people here in London and maybe some special guests from other parts of the world. We're collecting some of those news and articles, and it's available on our website. So if you want to check that out, a lot of good news and information about walking and cycling. The last two beats is we are organizing, our bicycle mayor is organizing to help with the bike delivery for people who cannot go out and buy food or isolated at home. So you want to help with that. And if you're a cyclist and if you want to help with that, you can reach out to the Bicycle Mayor, and you can see we share some information about that on our Facebook page. And the last announcement is the bicycle play. The Alvego route is preparing and is asking for feedback from cyclists. So if you want to give some feedback, want to give some information, just check on our Facebook page as well. We have some information there. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Daniel, and he can invite our two guests.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. I'm super excited for this week's video because we have some great guests who love to think about big ideas, and they're in London, Ontario, and they are great resources to have. So I'm really hoping that this video and conversation is useful for us and for you. And so I just want to start with a brief introduction. William is a professor at Fanshawe College of Urban Planning. He's got 35 years of professional planning experience, and we'll let him share a bit more about the work he's currently doing. And I want to introduce Misha. Misha is the manager of City Studio London. She's worked and studied and lived in many countries around the world, and brings all those ideas and experiences to London as she thinks through and likes to tackle some important problems that we face. So they're great assets to have on the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us, you two.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of my passions, which is cycling and urban planning. Great.
William, why don't you start with you? Could you tell us a little bit more about the work you do in London, maybe some of the things you like to think about, like you said, with urban planning and cycling, just briefly, and then a personal note too about how COVID is affecting your life. And we'll do the same for Misha after.
As a professor of GIS and urban planning and at the School of Design and Environmental Planning, my role is to help educate future planning technicians and planners in the importance of city building. And one of the main pieces of that city building is cycling and active transportation. So that becomes an important part of what I'm teaching. For me, COVID has made a significant change in my lifestyle. I'm doing my teaching and research from home, but at the same time, it's given me some opportunities to do a lot more cycling. So even during this crisis, I've been out cycling almost every day, even in the cold weather, and I look forward to continuing that through the summer. Thanks, Daniel.
Misha, maybe the same question for you. What's your work in London, and how is COVID affecting you personally?
Yeah, so my name's Misha, and I'm the manager of City Studio London. I was born and raised in London, and went to study architecture in Toronto in 2000, and was away from London for about 15 years and returned in the last few years. I worked in 7 countries. I've never owned a car, so I rely very actively on cycling, and a big proponent of active transportation, and have lived in some pretty amazing cities that have done some really neat things around supporting cycling, such as Berlin, London, England, Paris, many places. And so as the manager of City Studio, what we're working on is connecting strategic projects from the City of London with or across all 5 post-secondary institutions in London, so that students can work on real projects from the city in their course curriculum, and really have an impact on the city. And so how COVID has been affecting my personal life, as with Will, working online, working with the students and the city staff online. And luckily, we worked really hard in this first year to have a lot of resources online. So we were sort of well set up to do that. And getting ready now for the matches for next year. And we do have 1 cycling project so far on the books for next year. And we'll be looking to continue to create more projects that are looking at active transportation, certainly.
That's great, Misha. Thanks so much. I want to frame the conversation today in sort of 2 main sections, and the first being our response to COVID and cycling as a response to COVID, and the second part of our discussion about going forward and thinking about cycling as a tool for sustainable development or recovery from the pandemic. And so to start off our conversation on the response, or the immediate response, we've seen in other crises in the past, whether it be earthquakes or the 1973 oil embargo, cycling has had a significant role in the response to that. So this isn't a new thing, that cycling can be a really good solution to a crisis. And we've seen around the world in cities close to home, like Calgary or Brampton, cities in Oakland or Bogota in Colombia, where they've created temporary bike lanes as a response to this, to allow more people to ride safely. We've seen things like streets becoming seating patios in Tampa, Florida, and as they're encouraging their businesses to reopen, they're trying to do so in a safe way, and so they can reopen responsibly. And we've seen the city you mentioned, Berlin, they've put together a how to build temporary bike lanes in 10 days, a little info guide on how to do it, so other cities can learn from their example. So all around the world, we see these immediate responses that often involve changing the way our streets look and the space devoted to cars in our cities. And there's some really even bold, ambitious plans in Milan and Paris and Brussels that have all started to, again, reframe the conversation of our city streets and what they're used for. So I'd like to just ask you, are you familiar with these initiatives, and what's your opinion about them? What do you think about when you hear about all these things going on in different parts of the city? And could they happen here? Could they work here?
Yes, I'm familiar with some of the initiatives in other places around the world. Myself, I have a Dutch heritage, so I've had a chance to spend some time in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, and some of the largest cities, and I've enjoyed cycling around those cities. A lot of the initiatives, I think, are potentially usable here in the London context. We have an interest, and we have some centers or employment or education that could really benefit from infrastructure and promotion of cycling. So yes, I think some of those best practices can be used here. I'm really impressed with Brampton and Mississauga, where they're actually closing down some arterial roads and putting up construction cones to make it more accessible for cycling. I think we have to recognize the context. City of Brampton was saying there's too much pedestrian and cycling traffic on their trails, and that they needed another alternative for that type of exercise. They recognize that through the COVID crisis, people need exercise to maintain health and maintain their immune systems, and cycling and walking is part of that. And it also reduces stress. So having that opportunity to exercise. Should London do the same? Absolutely. Certainly during the few weeks of the crisis, when I'm on the Thames Valley Parkway, I'm very happy and excited to see all the pedestrian and cycling traffic. But I think in order to improve the safety and reduce the risk of COVID transmission, the City of London should be looking at adding new protected bike lanes using the construction cones. So taking a lane of traffic out and potentially creating a cycling path. So I'm very much in support of it, and I think there are opportunities. We can look to the cycling master plan of 2016 that the city adopted, as well as the new London plan that shows an active transportation system. Those are some of the sources that we could start looking at. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks, Will.
Mischa,
would you like to add something?
Thank you. Yeah. From my experience, so I lived in these cities that were implementing a lot of these measures before this crisis, and certainly in speaking with many of my friends in Paris through the last sort of 6 months as they were going through a major public transportation strike, the bike lanes and cycling infrastructure became kind of critically important actually for people to be able to move around the city, and has made a huge impact on their strategic kind of drive going forward, creating more cycling infrastructure in the city. Also the shared bikes was another really neat experience that I had living in Paris. I didn't actually own a bike. I only used a shared bike, which cost about $40 a year. And just actually getting to have that experience to feel what the implication of that is. I didn't have to, for example, think about where I parked the bike. I always left the bike. So I didn't have to think of in French you say aller-retour. It's not a two-way trip that I take. I only ever took a one-way trip on a bike. And that actually enabled me to do a lot more cycling because oftentimes when it's a two-way trip, you have to think about whether or not you're going to want to come back. And if, for example, you're meeting up with somebody and going somewhere else, then you've left your bike somewhere. So I think there's a lot to be learned from just sort of the actual user experience of the different infrastructure. In Berlin, for example, having raised bike lanes that were actually on the sidewalk level, that created an entirely different experience of safety, which makes cycling a lot more accessible to more population. I know that within my family, I'm one of the only people in my family that cycles. Because for the younger people in my generation, they don't feel safe to cycle on the road in the city, and for the older generation, they don't feel safe to cycle on the road. So the separated lanes as well in Paris as well, and the raised lanes in Berlin that I experienced were really changed the experience of cycling, so that it was much more pleasurable and really safe. And I think the safety piece is critically important when we're thinking about how to make more accessible cycling experience for the public.
Thanks, Mischa. I just want a quick reminder, and hearing your answer and Will's answer, we just had earlier today at 1 p.m. we had a webinar with Share the Road, and they had 3 guests from different municipalities here in Ontario sharing what they are already doing, and some of those measures that we just mentioned, like temporary bike lanes, and really trying to encourage people to bike and walk more, and not only to keep safe during the pandemic, but also to stay active, and how important it is for our mental and physical health. So the webinar is recorded. So if you go to the Share the Road website, there's I think it's Share the Road webinars, and you can watch the previous webinars. And I think this is the second one, and they'll probably have more webinars to share the emerging best practices that we're seeing and around not only here in Ontario, but also in Canada. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks so much for your responses. This question kind of could be for both the response and looking forward, but I think, especially now, what options are there for people who don't have a car, you know, in the short term and the long term? And especially, Will, as you as a professor at Fanshawe, you probably deal with a lot of students who maybe are relying on the bus or walking or biking to get to school. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit about that, what you think their options are and how we could enable more options in the short and long term?
From my perspective, accessibility for students is a big concern. I think one of the very progressive things that the City of London, Fanshawe, and Western have done in the past is that the bus pass for the entire year is included in the student's tuition. Now with the pandemic, a lot of people are going to be very reluctant to use public transit, and cycling is that option. And the question is, how do we get more and more students cycling? One option might be to include a bike share as part of the tuition, so that Fanshawe College, Western University could have a fleet of bicycles that students could use for the year and return at the end of the year as their transportation, so as a transportation alternative. Students are going to, I think, walk a lot more, that they're not going to be as likely to take transit. So those are the two first pieces. Certainly the bike share program, the Purple Bike program that Western has, and the bike share program that Fanshawe has, which is fairly small scale, relatively small scale, can be expanded to make it more accessible for students. And I think the work that CycleLinks does in promoting bicycle maintenance, best practices for cycling, can be integrated somehow into the Fanshawe College or the Western programs.
Thanks, Will.
Yep.
Misha, I mean, you mentioned bike share in Paris, you mentioned the safety you experienced in Berlin and the separated bike lanes. Do you see potential for the city or the post-secondary institutions to move these ideas forward?
Certainly. I mean, I think these discussions are so important for that, bringing awareness. I think one of the things that's hard is when we don't know that there are these other opportunities to live in different ways, as it's been kind of modeled by other places. And it's hard for us to even imagine, you know, a potential emerging future. So I think there's certainly, with the work in City Studio, we're able to do different studies of these potential scenarios and test some different, best practices, run different modeling and scenarios to help build confidence that this is possible in our city, and to also customize it to what the experience would be like in London. I think on the short term, the bike share option is really important to consider, and also to understand what the implications of that are as well. One of the things that was so interesting using that in Paris was that there was also a whole management system of the bikes. The bikes were also serviced and maintained, and so I never had to worry about taking care of the bikes. They were also displaced around the city depending on what the use was throughout the day. So there was actually a truck that would move bikes from one part of the city to another part of the city, especially at nighttime as people were moving between work and home. So that was really important. And I think in the long term, some of the stuff I experienced in the UK, in London, England, with the road taxes on car use essentially in the center of the city, and creating really designated bus lanes in London. In London, England, the longest bus wait time I ever experienced was 4 minutes. And so what that meant was that I was so confident that I could always rely on the buses to be able to move around the city as well as, get myself to a meeting. I knew that I would be on time, get myself to work or appointments. And so I really integrated and used that bus system. And I think that's a really important piece to consider, is that as we're moving cars kind of off the road, we can expect to see a much better user experience of the public transportation infrastructure. And so it's not about sort of moving cars off the road and then imagining that we'll still have the same 15-minute bus wait that we have today. It's that, no, we would expect to have increased public transportation on those routes, so that we could really use those systems efficiently. And then the bus and how the bike and the public transportation kind of work together as well. So as we design those systems together, we can have a really playful and fun and engaging and inspiring experience of our humanity.
Thank you so much, Misha. And both you and Will mentioned the importance of public transit, and we at London Cycle Link, we also believe that public transit is very important. There is actually a petition to fund public transit throughout Ontario, and we are one of the groups who signed that petition, because we do believe that public transit is important. And there is a survey from TCAT, the Toronto Centre for Active Transportation, and what they show is that a lot of people are concerned with using public transit right now. And like I said, we support strongly the public transit, and we really want to make it reliable and fast, as Misha just mentioned now. But we also understand that a lot of those people are making different choices. And those choices could be getting a car, or using more the car that you already have, or using cycling as one of the options. So just to keep that thought in mind, that will be a transition period, and it might not only be this 1-2 months as things go back to the new normal, but we really need to think where and how people will move, what kind of transportation they will choose if they're moving away from public transit, at least for the coming months. Daniel.
That's great, Luis. Yeah, I think it's, certainly a transition time, and I think it's an opportunity time too, which is why we're having these conversations and trying to encourage more people, like you said, Misha, to imagine a new future. We think this is a huge opportunity. So that's exciting. One of the ways that some other cities have tried to encourage cycling is to offer some sort of, we call them soft measures, not maybe the temporary bike lane, but subsidies or encouragement incentives for people to bike. And some of those are direct for buying a bike or having your bike repaired. Some of them are in Montreal. They're doing a really neat cargo bike delivery system where the city's actually stepping in for local businesses, to support local businesses, and saying, we'll help you deliver your products to people at home, but we're going to do it in a sustainable fashion using cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes. So these are sort of some of the soft measures in place that promote a sustainable future, but also support cycling. How important are these soft measures, and is there one that stands out to you as a really useful one for London to model itself after?
One of the things that I've noticed online is that a number of cities have now made the bike share programs free. So that might be a short-term initiative as a soft measure to encourage more cycling and get people used to it. I think there should be discounts for to encourage cycling, whether that be through subsidizing repair programs, creating more amenities for bikes. But really, what we're trying to do is level the playing field between cycling and car use. And as much as we have to create incentives for the cycling, we have to create disincentives for parking. One of the things that the City of London is thinking of is putting up a new parking structure on Queen's Ave near Richmond. A joint venture between the city and a private developer to have ground floor commercial and several levels of parking above that. First of all, I think the City of London should manage all public parking and private parking spaces in the downtown. They should be setting the rates. There should be a licensing program so that there's less incentive to park your car downtown for long periods of time and more incentive to bike. There should be secured bicycle parking, which is free, so that similar to having free parking for cars, can we not have free secured parking for bicycles in the core area to create more of those soft measures, creating the environment where taking the bike is just the same as taking the car. And just one thing that I'd like to build on from what Misha said earlier, a change in the cycling environment, and that's electronic bikes, e-bikes. I think that's very much going to be a significant part of the future. It's going to increase the mobility, capacity, and range of a lot of people that are uncomfortable traveling distances that we have here in London on a standard bicycle. And I think that encourages an aging population, myself included, for people that might like to continue cycling for a longer period. So that's a soft measure. Making room for e-bikes in the environment would be a very positive change.
Thanks, Will. Maybe we'll, or Misha, do you want to jump in there on the soft measures?
Yeah, sure. I think that the disincentive piece is really important, and that was sort of something I was pointing to. In London, England, they have a road tax through the center of the city, so you actually pay to drive through the center of the city, and so it's mainly just delivery trucks that are driving and taxis that are driving through the center of the city, and then obviously I think this piece around convenience and user experience and how that plays into security, I think is really important. My experience of the bike share in Paris is that it's also something I never really had to think about. I locked up the bike to the bike station. So I used the shared bike. I had a little card that I tapped, and then it released the bike to me. I rode it around, and I had an app on my phone that told me where I could park it. I parked it, and it was locked into that system. And if it wasn't locked, it would charge me for some amount of money. So the system was designed to create sort of that security for the bike itself. Obviously, there's cost there as well for, when people vandalize the equipment. But yeah, I think then the other piece around the subsidy, certainly as Will's pointed out, some different subsidies for public transportation use, which I think does sort of play into cycling as well. That I used the same pass to access the bike as I used to access my public transportation. And in France, employers actually contribute into that system as part of the transportation of their employees. So my metro pass, let's say my public transportation pass, was about $30 a month, I believe, in Paris. And then it was an additional less than $40 a year for the cycling pass. So it's extremely accessible. And when it's accessible on that scale, then we create these economies of scale, because it's easy to roll those out across an entire institution, an entire employer, for example. And then we can get the scale that we need to really be able to deliver a quality service that creates the convenience whereby the system is really useful and pleasurable to use.
Thank you so much, Misha. It would be really great if some of not only the municipal but provincial and federal government could really start looking into one of those solutions. I just wanted to put, we had a question from Vijay from Mumbai in India, and I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but here's the question. What's the plan for cargo bike hubs? We see more and more cargo bikes, and we have the London Bike Cafe really stimulating our cargo bike culture here in London. And does any of you, Will or Misha, would like to add anything about this idea of cargo bike hubs in the city?
It's a good question. I think there's opportunity for it. There have been some commercial delivery companies that have looked at cargo bikes as an alternative, especially in congested areas. So eventually, I think there is an opportunity for it here. In the short term, there may not be the mass or the demand for a cargo hub. That would be my only question.
Thank you so much, Will. Misha, I don't know if you want to add something, or Dan can lead us into the next question.
Yeah, why don't I,
similarly, we'll be keeping an eye on what we can learn from Mumbai for sure, because there's lots of good biking there.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay.
Very good. Yeah, we're getting up there in time, so I want to make sure we spend some time thinking about cycling for the future, and this sort of, as you mentioned, Misha, this new reality, or this using our imagination to see a different future. So in terms of beyond the immediate crisis, how can cycling play an important part in the city building strategy of the future in London?
From my perspective, cycling is going to be an important part of the future development of the City of London. Cycling provides great opportunities for everyone. It's relatively inexpensive. It's accessible to a large population and age range. So in order to level the playing field, really, between wealthy people and disadvantaged people, I think cycling is going to continue to be an important part of the future development of London. City of London has made significant commitments to that through the London Plan. We have an active transportation network for cycling and walking. Through the Cycling Master Plan from 2016, we can see a roadmap to the future. And perhaps this time in history, this crisis, could be an impetus to bring those investments along quicker and improve the sustainable development for London. One of the really interesting outcomes of the crisis is that the air quality in most municipalities has improved because of lower amounts of industrial use. And cycling can continue to maintain that by reducing the demand for private automobile traffic. So I think there's some really key opportunities for cycling to contribute to sustainable development.
Thanks, Will. Thank you very much, Will. I want to ask you, Misha, you've talked about this vision and you've experienced it firsthand in other cities. And I think you, naturally living in London, want to see some of that come to reality, because it's more than just getting from A to B. It's about the experience of the city and getting to know each other and the connections with our economy and our local businesses. So in your mind, if we implement everything that you described or imagine that's important as it relates to cycling or transportation as a whole, could you describe that vision and what maybe just one or two steps to get there, to move along to get closer to that vision?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question to be able to imagine, one's own life in those scenarios, and also the people that we care about and people who we relate to. So for me, I think about, it's really important that I'm able to use cycling as a mode of transportation that really works in my life. So for me, that needs to be coupled with public transportation, because I need to have days where I also don't feel like riding a bike for whatever reason, and I'm able to hop on the bus and get to wherever I need to go. So I think that piece is really important, that those two things are married together. And then I think of I would like my children to be able to ride their bikes to school, to go and ride bikes with their friends. That right now is a really useful way for children to be able to connect, is by riding bikes, because it inherently creates this necessarily creates space between them. And so if they could be safe, I think that's really important. And then that piece around, if we could all be safe on our bikes to be able to access centers of commerce. Right now, we had been moving in a direction of creating these kind of consumer areas that are actually not really designed for bikes to interact with. They're really designed for cars and walking pedestrians. So if we can begin to think about cyclists as also consumers who want to go and support local economy. So how do children, for example, bike to the store to buy their sibling a birthday present? And imagine what would that look like if they were crossing a big box parking lot. That would not be the safest place for them to be. So I think we have to think about those scenarios. And then I think the other piece is really around London has a pretty big aging population. And I would like my mom to be able to ride her e-bike downtown to meet a friend for lunch. And currently she's not comfortable doing that. And so again, I think there needs to be separated lanes so that people who want to bike but who don't feel safe biking with cars are able to do that.
That's great, Misha. That's really good insight. And I love the personal touch there that just seeing, you know, I've got kids, I imagine that too, thinking about them growing up and wanting them to have access to the city by bike. And so anyway, it's just super neat to see it in those terms. Final question here is, how do you see your organization making, or what role does your organization have in making cycling a better option or a more viable option in London? And Will, maybe we'll start with you, and then Misha.
Fanshawe College has over 20,000 students, full and part-time, at various campuses. We do have an important role to play. First of all, by making it convenient on the campus for facilities to secure your bike, to make it a common practice. I think we have opportunities as a college to lobby and advocate on behalf of students, faculty, and staff to create those dedicated bike lanes, cycle tracks that are safe, convenient for everyone to use. We have an opportunity to, again, improve the bike share program that we have at the college, and really create a culture of cycling at Fanshawe. One of the things I do every year is take my first-year students on a bike ride from Fanshawe College to the Forks of the Thames. We talk about city planning. We see the Thames Valley Parkway, so that becomes part of our students' understanding of London and the relationship of planning to cycling. So those are a few things that I can do both at an institutional level and at a classroom level of incorporating cycling into the curriculum, into what students learn and what they expect to do when they leave the college.
Great, thanks, Will. And what about you, Misha?
Yeah, it's such an important question for us all to be thinking about. And so the things that kind of come to mind for me is City Studio can continue to champion projects that focus on cycling in the city or issues that relate to cycling in the city and active transportation. This year we had a survey of ride-sharing programs across all the campuses in London. So students were beginning to think about even the notion of ride-sharing and some of the infrastructure that exists for that. And it began kind of thinking about, transportation, what are some other alternatives to transportation rather than just everybody driving their own car to school. And then this year we'll have some specific cycling projects that will look at harvesting some best practices from other places that we've talked about a lot on this call as well. And the other piece is that this year we'll be developing our studio semester course, and that program does include more cycling activities, kind of like what Will's talking about, taking the students actually out on bikes into the city to explore the city. It's such a intimate way of exploring the city. It calls people into their consciousness, into their humanity, where they're actually physically experiencing their motion through space and physically feeling Earth's kind of wind and through my hair, my skin is such an important part of cycling as well. And so, yeah, I think those pieces are really important. And then the other thing I've been doing and will continue to do this year is to just talk about that. I've lived in all these countries and I haven't owned a vehicle. And so what the implication for that for City Studio is that when I'm with city staff and we're going to meet a faculty person on campus or meeting a class on campus, I just call them and ask them if I can get a ride with them. And I begin that conversation around, I don't have a vehicle. And so can I get a ride with you to where we need to go? And it's not just because I don't have a vehicle, it's also partly because I don't believe that we need to each take vehicles separately in order to get to the same place when we're both going from downtown to Fanshawe's campus, for example. So those are some of the things that I'll be sure to be keeping in mind this year.
Thank you so much, Misha. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I completely, and I'm kind of trying to be here, but also take care of the tech stuff in the backstage. And I completely forgot to put our nice little logo over there. Anyways, we'll do this the next time. So I just want to give a last reminder before Daniel wraps it up. So a lot of those news articles, ideas, projects that they're happening around the world, we do have a list of them, and we try to keep that list updated on our website. So you can just check in on this link, and you can check on our website a few other stuff and some of the projects we're trying to promote here in London, with more space for pedestrians and cyclists, and the free rides for frontline workers, and many more to come. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful chat with you, Daniel.
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think it was ambitious for us to think it would take any less time than 40 minutes to tackle some of these issues and to hear from both of you, because you have such good insights. So I appreciate your time. I certainly also am excited about working together more in the future, as you imagine your organizations and ours promoting cycling in the city. And I hope that we can do that together, and certainly just making that imagination, that vision of the future become reality. I think that's so important, and I hope we can do that now in the short term as a response to the pandemic, but also in the future as we recover from and think about a new normal. Let's make sure that our kids can get to school by bike, or our grandparents or our mothers or fathers can get downtown to visit a friend for lunch. Let's make sure we can have that become a reality. So thanks for all your work and for your time today.
Will,
Thank you very
Misha,
much for having it.
If you can stay
Appreciate
connected, I'm gonna end the broadcast, and I want to just do a quick chat with you guys. So, any final words, Will?
Thank you very much for having us. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm always excited to talk about cycling in London. Bye now.
Misha?
Likewise, thank you everyone for being on the call, and thank you for everyone's continued kind of dedication and passion around this. And I look forward to connecting again soon.
Okay. Be kind, be calm, be safe, and be active.
Bye now.
Hello. Oh, I think Will got out. Let me end the broadcast here.